Chasing Time is a sister film to Chasing Ice and Chasing Coral. It's directed by Jeff Orlowski and Sarah Kao, and Mass Effects was approached to stabilize and condense the images of melting glaciers into a time-lapse. Photos that have been captured for over a decade. We were tasked with condensing a staggering number of raw images from 15 years of time-lapse photography into the 11 core time-lapse sequences for the film. In 2012, the time-lapses for Chasing Ice were created by hand. Image candidates were handpicked to match an overcast reference frame that was clear of any water on the lens or variance in white balance or exposure. This was super time-consuming and didn't leave a lot of room to adjust the overall runtime or frame blending of the compiled time-lapses. Mass Effects created a custom Python toolset to help this image selection process. We wanted to be able to easily tune the duration, color characteristics, and sample interval from the full set of original images without needing to comb through them by hand. Python's OpenCV library is a computer vision toolset that allowed for us to build a database of information about each image. Things like overall brightness, color quality, as well as the original EXIF camera metadata. There was a lot of trial and error, but we finally arrived at a useful dataset for each image from each location. We were then able to slice the database to create our ideal selection of image candidates that would produce the best results. Building this database was a time-consuming process, around 17 hours per location per image set. The script allowed us to focus on overall average hue, saturation, and value. These allowed us to zero in on images that fit our ideal image. The real question is, how do you select the target photo? In order for the time-lapse to be consistent, we need an image set that has the ideal values we need. There's no tint towards blue or orange, and images are not over or underexposed. There's no blurry watermarks on the lens, and it's not blown out by fog or snow. This means that overcast days are ideal. The HSV values, hue, saturation, and value, helped the image selections and avoided the majority of images that didn't fit the ideal image set. But after this initial pass, we began to realize we needed a more intense selection process. There were things just not being caught by the sorting algorithm, specifically days where the conditions made the glaciers distorted or completely blocked out by fog. This is where we introduced the ROI, or region of interest. This allowed us to capture a section of the sky and section of the rocks, and allowed us to fine-tune between the two captured values. If the rocks were covered in snow, it meant that the image was generally covered in fog or was in deep winter and the glacier wasn't moving. If the sky was too tinted or overexposed, it allowed us to parse out the images where it was a sunny, overexposed day, and inversely when the camera was completely blocked out by snowfall and fog. The overall image selection was getting better and better. However, with some images, particularly on the Solheim time-lapse, the afternoon position of the sun would reflect off the water, and in addition to creating a bright spot in the middle of the frame, it would dim the rest of the shot as the camera attempted to compensate for the exposure time. After, again, a lot of trial and error, we found a pattern in the dataset we built that paired with these images. The exposure time from the original EXIF data was a good indicator for which of these images were getting pinged with a reflection. Any image where the exposure was faster than 1/500th of a second would be thrown out of the selection. On the other hand, parsing the images was a pretty quick process. To parse through hundreds of thousands of images, it would take around 30 minutes to get a selection of what we wanted. But still, that's burnt time. So we began putting together a thumbnail viewer, which showed around 60 images over the course of the 7,000 images we needed to create the full and stable time-lapse. Seeing them all together really helped decide if it was something that was worth pushing through to the final script or if it was just a completely botched selection. We were getting some really consistent images that had matching colors, but some were heavily obscured by water on the lens. We initially would make a pass through the image candidates and remove these by hand. But there's a better way. We use OpenCV's Laplacian filter analysis to help the computer evaluate the overall image sharpness and reject images that were below an acceptable average sharpness. I mean, in some sections, literally there was icicles dripping down from the top of the lens and obscuring the top half of the image, so we had to find ways to cut down on that, and that was the Laplacian filter. Now that we've gone through the scripting, we finally get to the final sequencing. So we dropped everything into Nuke, we began stabilizing, point tracking, and match moving. We then deflickered it with Chronos and did a dust buster and denoising and a handful of extra things to help stabilize the final image set. And it doesn't sound like stabilizing this image set would be very difficult considering it's a time-lapse. The cameras have been in the same spot for the last 15 years. But for cameras that are mounted to concrete blocks, you'd be shocked at the amount of movement that they had. We then pushed it to DaVinci to get it back to its original color space, and then we also tuned it there too, just to do a final pass of deflickering, dehazing, and denoising. And that's how we created these time lapses for chasing time.